Men først undersøger dokumentaristen Bud Ryan, hvordan atomvåben er blevet en del af både den amerikanske og japanske historie.
It was a very beautiful, fine day. Yes. Wow. Blue sky. And I could see 2 American bombers, B-29 bombers, flying very high in the air. I just thought, oh, beautiful planes shining in the morning sun, silver white, like ice candies.
陽光の中に投げ込まれたような感じと同時に火のシャワーがさーっと火の雨が降ったような感じもしました。
I was just crawling around the floor. When I touched my head, my whole body was bleeding from head to feet.
生き残った人たちみんなもう本当に性別がわからないぐらい真っ黒く焼けたり、何にも着てなくて、腕の白い骨が見えても皮膚も肉も全部こうずらっとぶら下がったようにしてでも歩いてる人もおりました。
What does it mean to each of us that we now can destroy our own species? It's a subject that seems to repel the human mind and the human heart. And it's only on rare occasions that we permit ourselves somehow to look at it and glimpse it.
It's a very unstable situation. I think it's outrageous that it still exists. It's senseless.
The United States is a nation protected by 2 oceans from conventional invasion. The atomic bomb made the United States vulnerable for the first time in modern history. Nuclear weapons are about the only thing that makes us insecure, and they are the real threat out there.
We live in an age that's nuclear. Just what that means to some is unclear. I'm Ion Fleming, your atomic sage, and I'll be your guide to this nuclear age.
I think it's time for a different kind of guide for this nuclear age. I'm Bud Ryan, and I've had a special interest in nuclear weapons since I first went to Japan in 1991. Nuclear weapons have pretty much disappeared from public consciousness since the end of the Cold War. But from what I've learned over the years, and especially while making this film, I think we better start thinking about them again, and fast. All the things that have happened, let's say the past 17 or 18 years in my life, seem to have lined up for me to become an anti-nuclear activist. I married a Japanese woman, Tomoko, and when I went with Tomoko the first time to Japan, we went to Hiroshima. That was the first time I had been there, and it was just had monumental impact on me. It was the first time I had considered the atomic bombing of Japan from the point of view of the bombed, instead of from the point of view of the bomber. And then we moved to New Mexico in July of '91. And then when we found this property, right behind my shoulder is Los Alamos. Los Alamos is in the northern mountains of New Mexico. In 1943, the U.S. government brought some of the brightest scientific minds there to work on the Manhattan Project. 2 years later, those scientists drove their new invention, called Gadget, to a remote part of southern New Mexico to test it. On July 16, 1945, the United States catapulted the whole world into the nuclear age. Today, the test site is only open twice a year. I wanted to know why people would come from all over the world to take each other's pictures here as if they're at Niagara Falls when this place is still radioactive. So what do you think about what started here on July 16th, 1945?
Aren't we all glad it happened? I am.
So you think it won us the war?
Absolutely, I certainly do. I'm one of the many people that believe we saved many, many lives, both American and Japanese, by dropping the bomb.
I actually used to think that the bomb ended the war too, but then I came across an exhaustively researched book by author Gar Alperovitz.
I mean, Japan was essentially defeated by early 1945. They were making airplanes out of bamboo and crushing acorns to get fuel for the airplanes. Food was in great scarcity. We were bombing their cities regularly, one right after the other, with very little opposition.
The first pictures from inside Japan's devastated capital, Tokyo, three-quarters wiped out by the superfortress attacks long before the atomic bomb. A city which once held 6.5 million and was to have been the capital of all Asia, now lies in ashes. Scenes like these leave no doubt that Japan was thoroughly beaten before the atomic bomb.
And it seemed the only point that the Japanese were really concerned with was keeping the emperor.
That's the central point in all the discussions, that they wanted some assurances for the emperor, that without that, there's several ways to think about this. Without the assurances, we knew they would never surrender. He was a godlike figure. So long as we did not give assurances, we knew they would fight on. The question about the emperor was never whether he was going to be kept. U.S. military wanted to keep him all along for other reasons. The question was when we would tell them that. And we did not tell them that until after the bombs were essentially dropped.
I knew very well we'd never get the Japanese to calm down until the emperor told them to do it. And I wanted to be sure that he was in a position to do that when the time came for Japan to surrender.
What's that first number that Truman mentions, though, about how many lives that the bomb saved?
Well, he's all over the map on the numbers.
We could advance on Japan and fight every inch of the way, losing 1 million of our own men, or drop the atomic bomb. We had expected to spend at least 150,000 youngsters in order to win the Japanese surrender. But they would have killed 3 million more people on both sides.
The number that was given credibility was created by essentially a propaganda article written to defend the atomic bomb by Secretary of War Stimson much later. And it's the 1 million figure, which was essentially a made-up figure.
We talked with Ivan Ulrich at the Federation of American Scientists about the decision to drop the bomb. The FAS was originally founded by the group of Manhattan Project scientists who were opposed to the dropping of the bomb on Japan.
Part of the motivation for bombing a Japanese city was to impress the Russians for after the war. It's certainly clear that some of the decisions that we made in the development of nuclear weapons during World War II were designed to outlast that war and were getting ready for nuclear weapons to be used against the Soviet Union.
We all learned in school that we had to drop the bomb to save lives, but now it seems that there may have been other motives. We might have been trying to impress the Soviets, we may have been conducting a big experiment, and maybe another reason was just plain old revenge for Pearl Harbor.
All right, let's take a few minutes right now and get acquainted with an A-bomb. Basically and primarily, the atomic bomb is a giant sledgehammer. The shock wave of a nuclear explosion wrecks the works of nature as well as of man. It's a triple threader. It blasts, it burns, it wields its own unique wallop, nuclear radiation.
While the bomber may regard his invention as a marvel of science, I was learning that the people who were bombed have an entirely different perspective. The museum in Hiroshima had such a profound influence on me that for nearly 20 years, I've been trying to figure out how to share what's inside this building with as many people as possible. The chairman of the foundation that runs the museum feels the same way, so he's agreed to give us an on-camera tour. So, the main part of the museum, and we have this horrific exhibit right off the bat. What is this showing?
Well, in a way, this is the piece that we want to show the most. Okay? Right after the bombing, this is what Hiroshima was like, except that there were hot flames chasing you. And some people say that this is too much like a horror house. And then other people say, no, this is nowhere near bad enough. You see their faces? Their faces are still pretty recognizable as human faces. The faces of the actual survivors were not. You couldn't tell if they were male or female. And anyone who was within 1 kilometer and was exposed directly, those burns were not skin, just skin. They were through all layers of skin and into the meat. So nobody survived at that level. This whole section here on radiation is really why nuclear weapons are illegal from the point of view of time. It is not limited in time.
So it's the bomb that keeps on killing.
Right.
The museums in Japan presented me with a perspective I hadn't really considered before. And that started me wondering about how the museums in the United States might be telling the story of nuclear weapons. So we set out to get some on-camera tours of some of the biggest U.S. museums devoted to the topic. This museum in Albuquerque is sanctioned by the Smithsonian to present our nuclear history. So here you have pictures of, I'm assuming, both Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Mostly this is Hiroshima.
I noticed that there's really no pictures of victims. Who made that decision not to show those kind of photographs in this kind of exhibit?
Because this is a public museum and a family museum, we don't have them on display for the general public, not burned bodies. However, if you'd like to see them, they are available and can be seen on video in the presentations we have in the theater.
Okay.
Now this collection does indicate and show the destruction of Hiroshima and indicates as well that it was rebuilt. It's one tiny part of our storyline to showcase the history of the nuclear story.
We also got permission to shoot at the Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas. It had bright colors and some child-friendly exhibits, like the museum in Albuquerque. It made nuclear weapons seem necessary and a big part of our peace and prosperity. Our guide was Troy Wade, who used to be the director of the entire Nevada test site. We began the tour with this museum's version of what happened during World War II.
Here's Adolf Hitler. This is the beginning of World War II, and Hitler was thought to be working on fission energy. And that caused Einstein to write his famous letter to President Roosevelt, in which he said, Mr. Roosevelt, I think we ought to do this as a country, and that was the beginning of the Manhattan Project of Los Alamos. Japan joined the war. Here's Trinity, the first test of an atomic bomb in New Mexico, I think 63 years ago. And then here you see pictures of Fat Man being loaded on the Enola Gay, and the 2 drops on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered, but look who...
That's about all the attention this museum gives to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But I think we need to take a closer look at a place Troy Wade mentioned, Los Alamos, the place where this all began.
This is the mile-high city of Los Alamos, the atomic city. During the tense days of World War II, an entire American city of men, women, and children was hidden behind a seemingly unimportant postal number, Box 1663. Today, such secrecy is no longer possible. Today, the city boldly and proudly parades the normal pattern of American living. This now appears to be an average city of schools and playgrounds, of houses and apartments, a place to live where men and women can feel at home. But for all of these things, the city is not an ordinary city.
The Manhattan Project grew to become Los Alamos National Lab, known by its acronym LANL. The lab still has the mission of manufacturing and maintaining the U.S. stockpile of nuclear weapons. There's a museum there devoted to nuclear weapons history, but they refuse to let us come in and film. We even asked one of our New Mexico senators to write a letter to them on our behalf, but they still wouldn't let us in. So it makes me wonder, what are these people hiding? To try to answer that question, we took a trip to Los Alamos with Joni Ahrens, who runs the watchdog group Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety. They keep a close eye on activities at the lab. We start our tour of the town at the lab's original plutonium manufacturing facility.
This is part of Technical Area 21. This is where they did plutonium manufacturing, and now those operations are coming back here. We're very concerned that any work down here to take down these buildings has to be done as responsibly as possible, because people live a block away here. Of all of the Department of Energy sites, this site has more people living right on its boundary than any other site in the country.
So, and this is one of the most polluted places on the planet behind us.
Yeah.
So you're saying the stuff they used to do here, they now do at other places up here in Los Alamos. Do you think they've learned any of the lessons that mistakes they made here?
Oh, I wish they did. They haven't done enough to be able to monitor, to tell us that they're actually doing things better. It's important to know that the Rio Grande flows beneath Los Alamos, and Los Alamos is located on the Pajarito Plateau about 1,000 feet above the Rio Grande. So on the mesa tops, there's waste that's buried, and then in the canyon bottoms. So there's 18 million cubic feet of waste buried at LANL that has been generated since 1943.
18 million cubic feet of waste is enough to fill around 4,500 tractor trailers, and that's just the waste from one site in the nuclear weapons complex.
All of that waste is buried in unlined pits, trenches, and shafts, or else it's been disposed of by high-tech technology, such as the kick and roll technology, where they would put the barrels on the edge of the canyon walls and kick them over the edge. That was a technology. They've also discharged an enormous amount of radioactive and toxic and hazardous liquid waste into the canyons, and they discharge treated water now, but in the early days of the Manhattan projects, until 1963, they were discharging untreated radioactive waste into the canyons. So all of that buried waste and the liquid waste is migrating to the Rio Grande. There's detections of plutonium and other radionuclides in Elephant Butte Lake, which is 200 miles south of Los Alamos.
Joni takes us on a hike through a city park that's a couple of blocks from Los Alamos High School. It's called Acid Canyon because scientists were dumping liquid radioactive waste here until 1963. This whole canyon has elevated levels of radioactivity, despite the fact that the lab has vacuumed it 4 times to get rid of the radiation. We're going to a low point in the canyon where some of that old waste has been concentrated. Joni's group alerted the lab about the contamination there months ago, and supposedly they took some action. She wants to see whether they really took care of it. So while the rest of us wait on top, she dons protective gear and goes down to get samples and take readings.
373, 400, 411. Okay, 411.
That reading is about 13 times higher than the level of background radiation for this part of the country. Background radiation exists all over the world. It comes from natural sources, as well as the fallout from man-made nuclear weapons testing.
Do you feel comfortable taking your mask off yet, or you want to leave it on?
It's okay now. The blatant disregard. They know that that's there because they've been working with our scientists on it, and they've scraped it, but it's still there.
So you've taken readings there before. Are they similar to what you got today?
Yeah.
And, you know, we were figuring out, is that like 13 times higher than background?
Yeah. In a public place. And they haven't done the proper remediation. And they know it's there. So if they can't even take care of something that's isolated, that's in a public place, what are they doing with the stuff on their land? Quote unquote, their land.
Yeah, well, it's our land. Aren't we the government? We the people?
Yeah, we the people. Just such flagrant disregard, though, for human health and the environment.
The scientists and staff at Los Alamos suffered health effects from radiation exposure, as did many other people who worked at various sites in the nuclear weapons complex. As of late 2009, almost 53,000 nuclear weapons workers had been recognized by the federal government for having gotten sick or having died from hazardous exposure they received. But the government denied the claims of 127,000 other nuclear weapons workers. Workers who mine uranium, the very first step in the nuclear cycle, have also suffered from exposure to radiation. To find out more, I talked to Dr. Mike McCallie with Physicians for Social Responsibility, which has been researching the effects of radiation since 1961. What are some of the health effects that people who mine uranium would be?
Short of working in in a lead suit, if you're going to mine uranium, you're going to be at risk. They are being irradiated as uranium is an emitter. Not everybody who was a uranium miner has cancer, but they have cancer at rates that far exceed the general population. There is not any way to make that a safe activity.
There are big deposits of uranium ore in New Mexico. So I rode out to Laguna Pueblo to visit Carletta Garcia. She grew up looking down on the world's biggest open-pit uranium mine, and she lost both her mother and her husband to cancer caused by exposure to the radioactive uranium.
My mother hauled high-grade uranium ore to the crusher and was exposed big time to the radiation. At lunch they would eat and they would sit on top of the ore piles and have lunch. At that time they really didn't issue any type of equipment, but a little paper mask to put over their face and a flashlight and a hard hat and safety glasses were what were mandatory at the mine. But the only type of safety meetings we had were like with OSHA, and it was how to properly use machines and nothing about radiation or...
So you shouldn't be eating your lunch on a pile of uranium.
Nobody ever said that to us, no. But we are putting our generations in grave danger. We don't know what the next generation's going to have to suffer as a result of radiation.
There's even more opportunity for radiation exposure at the end of the nuclear cycle, after the bomb explodes. Nations with nuclear weapons have exploded more than 2,400 of them, all in the name of testing and national security. The radioactive fallout from all that testing has boosted the level of background radiation around the entire globe. But the effects have been most keenly felt by people who lived on or near the testing areas. One hard-hit population lives on the Bikini Atoll, where the U.S. blew up 22 weapons over a 12-year period. Anthropologist and author Barbara Rose Johnston has researched the effects of these blasts on the island people.
I with the people of Rongelap. Rongelap is an atoll that is downwind from where we tested at Bikini and in Inuitak. Downwind meaning some 83 miles from where we tested our largest nuclear weapon, Bravo test, in March 1st, 1954. And the people on Rongelap were not evacuated, as they had been for previous tests. The people were left for 3 days in fallout, like snow coming down, before they were evacuated. The first couple of years, almost half the women had either unable to carry a baby to term, or the children that were born were not recognizable as children. Over the years, that became a problem throughout the Marshall Islands. And the kinds of things that women were giving birth to, there were no Marshallese words to describe. They had to make up terms like jellyfish baby or grapes or things like that to describe the kinds of things they're giving birth to. Despite the fact that we knew that there were not only concerns and problems with radiation from fallout, and not only that people were getting sick and ill, and we were documenting that, but we continued letting people live in a contaminated setting because those people didn't count very much, because those people were Marshallese. They were a different color of skin. They were in the middle of the Pacific. They, in some of the quotes that I found in the classified informal discussion between scientists who were doing this work, some of those quotes talk about, well, these people they're more like us than mice. And in the context of the times that this work was being done, the Marshallese were considered less human.
The Marshall Islanders weren't the only ones present during those bomb tests. There were U.S. military personnel there as well, and many of them were treated as less than human.
Within 1 to 7 minutes after the Baker blast, radioactive water was deposited on all but 9 of the target ships, producing dosages that would have been lethal to all exposed personnel. A month later, men were getting along swimmingly in the bombed lagoon.
We were assigned to what was called the salvage unit. 4 hours after each bomb detonation, we were back in the lagoon, alongside target vessels, putting out fires so that crews could come aboard later and assess the damage. So I'm on the bridge of the ship. I heard the captain of my ship to the flagship on voice radio. He told them, you know, here's the status of the job. All my men have had maximum safe exposure. You know what the reply was? Safe exposure my ass, don't let that ship sink. This is one of the reasons I say we weren't men. We were part of the equipment.
Nuclear testing is a high-risk business measured anyway, and it certainly was in the early days of atmospheric testing. People knew radiation was going away from the test, wherever the wind carried it, and that people were going to be exposed. I don't think there was any, I don't believe there was ever any deliberate decision to expose people.
There are approximately 200,000 U.S. atomic veterans and untold numbers of downwinders around the world. In the early years of the Cold War, the Atomic Energy Commission, which would later become the Department of Energy, spent a lot of effort and taxpayer money trying to convince a leery public that not only could you survive a nuclear attack, but that nuclear science was nothing short of a miracle and radiation was A-OK.
I declare, with all these atomic plants going up everywhere, I wonder if a girl's even safe in her own home. I just hope they know what they're doing.
You and I are living in the atomic age. The peaceful atom, no longer just a laboratory dream, is here today, working wonders, providing a happier, more abundant world for all mankind.
And already, through the healing power of the atom, we can all look forward to happier, healthier lives for ourselves and our families.
how we've gone down the medical road in large part occurred, and our positive uses in the medical technology, whether it be imagery or treatment, came out of a massive government investment in how can we come up with peaceful purposes of using these isotopes. Massive investment. Had that money been placed into other kinds of technologies and approaches, we would have a different dimension and approach to dealing with these diseases.
There's no threshold. There isn't a certain amount of low-level radiation that's safe. Okay, and there's now increasing concern about the levels of radiation that are used in diagnostic techniques.
So the question is, have these weapons done us any good? Have they kept us safe? We tried to talk to a variety of people who we thought would want to answer those questions. We asked the director of Los Alamos National Lab twice for an interview, and he ignored our requests. So we tried to talk to our elected representatives from New Mexico about nukes. We asked our 2 U.S. Senators, Jeff Bingaman and Tom Udall, and 2 of our U.S. House members, Ben Ray Lujan and Martin Heinrich, for interviews. They all either declined or ignored us. We also tried to talk to several people in the department that is in charge of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Safety Administration. But everyone we wrote to declined to talk to us, although they did say good luck with our project. So while we were in Washington, D.C., we went to the DOE headquarters to try and get a shot of me standing out in front of the building, saying we had attempted to talk with the people inside. But 4 men in military fatigues accosted us, took down all our personal info, erased our footage, and briefly detained us in front of the building. All this despite the fact that there were no signs forbidding videotaping or taking photographs. Well, we can learn something about how safe nukes have kept us by taking a look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was a close call that turned out to be a lot closer than most people thought at the time.
The United States answer was a quarantine of all offensive weapons being shipped from Russia to that island fortress. The U.S. threw up a steel fence prepared to stop any vessel carrying materials of war.
I went to find out more about this chapter of the Cold War and nuclear weapons in general from author Jonathan Schell, who's known for coining the term nuclear winter in his best-selling book, The Fate of the Earth.
Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis was by far the most dovish person in that room of the executive committee. And at one point he took Pierre Salinger aside and he said, "Say, do you think those people in there know that if we make a mistake, 200 million people can die in the next half an hour?"
The Cuban Missile Crisis changed President Kennedy. He started working behind the scenes with Khrushchev to abolish nuclear weapons, and in 1963, he went public with his intentions.
First, Chairman Khrushchev, Prime Minister Macmillan, and I have agreed that high-level discussions will shortly begin in Moscow, looking towards early agreement on a comprehensive test ban treaty. This generation of Americans has already had enough, more than enough, of war and hate and oppression.
But Kennedy's plan died with him, and the nuclear weapons buildup continued into Ronald Reagan's presidency. George Shultz, then Reagan's Secretary of State, was well aware of the world's growing nuclear arsenal and all of its dangers.
During the Cold War, people were paying a lot more attention, and the effort to keep track of things was intense. Even so, there were close calls on a nuclear exchange.
More close calls? How close are we talking? I went to find out more about this from the director of the Titan Missile Museum in Arizona. She used to serve in the Air Force here in this underground bunker, ready to launch the missile if duty called.
The whole war plan for the United States is based on the fact that it takes 30 minutes for a missile to fly between the United States and the former Soviet Union and vice versa. Then the only way that you're going to be able to launch your missiles if the Soviets launch from their sub first is if you get the keys out and if everybody is ready to launch.
There was never an alert, though, while you were working here, was there? That, like, be ready to launch, that something could be happening?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes. There were several times in the 80s where things got a little excited, kind of out of the blue. For example, when President Reagan was shot, they elevated the readiness of all the missile sites and all the strategic bombers.
It's just an awesomely irresponsible setup. I mean, to reduce the amount of time for the commander to brief the president to 30 seconds to a sound bite. I mean, that'd be a pretty good sound bite with the fate of the Earth hanging in the balance. But apparently they have the same timelines in Russia, because both sides moved to this launch on warning posture, which put us in that position.
The mission of the Titan II is peace through deterrence, to demonstrate that even if the Soviet Union attacked us first, that we would be able to retaliate with such force that we would wipe the Soviet Union off the earth just as they were wiping the United States off the earth, okay? And that whole theory is mutual assured destruction, also known as MAD, which I think sums it up very well.
Yes, a very appropriate acronym.
For me, as a young Air Force officer, I believe that, and that's how I did my job.
So how old were you when you were down here?
And I was in my early 20s. The whole time I was on crew. I was a crew commander right before I turned 24.
People think that after the Cold War ended, mutually assured destruction became a thing of the past. But it turns out the policy, MAD, is still alive and well.
Right now, as we're talking, the United States and Russia are prepared within a half hour or so to launch a total of more than 2,000 nuclear warheads at each other.
Yes, we and the Russians have nuclear weapons that are on alert status. It's a very unstable situation. I think it's outrageous that it still exists. It's senseless. Imagine we're on the side of a mountain. At the top of the mountain is a world free of nuclear weapons. The air is nice and clear up there. We can't even see it from here. At the bottom of the mountain is a world where more and more countries have nuclear weapons. We're going down the mountain right now. We better get turned around and start going up the mountain. And here are the steps that we need to take that will gradually get us up the mountain. And maybe after we get up a while, we'll get to a base camp where we can see the top. And then we'll have to figure out how to make that final assault.
Well, that's one approach, but I have a different approach. I think it should be like D-Day. You know, Eisenhower and Churchill and Roosevelt faced plenty of obstacles when they launched D-Day. They didn't say, well, let's go to the beaches and see how that goes and decide whether to climb the cliffs, and then let's decide how that goes and decide whether to liberate France, or then maybe move on into Germany. They said, no, we're going to launch this invasion, we're going to get the job done, we're going to face the obstacles, and we're going to overcome them. I would begin by announcing that it is the serious and determined policy of the United States to join with the other 9 nuclear powers on Earth to get rid of their weapons, their nuclear weapons, bring it down to 0, while at the same time putting in global verification and enforcement measures.
There is also support from people who many thought hawkish during the Cold War. The most famous examples are George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, who along with Sam Nunn and William Perry have published a call for nuclear abolition twice in the Wall Street Journal.
The reaction to this op-ed was to kind of bring people up short and say, you know, this nuclear issue has kind of fallen off the table, and we better pay attention because there is proliferation going on.
They traditionally have just laughed at the idea. and considered it just to be some kind of utopian nonsense. So their endorsement of it removes what has traditionally been one of the great obstacles to the idea. The irony of the situation is that we don't have the public movement.
Maybe the public would be outraged now if it knew how much money our country had spent on nuclear weapons so far. Conservative estimates reach higher than $7 trillion. And money, do you have any idea how much all this testing here at the Nevada test site has cost through the years?
Well, no, I do not. I know that it's a number that's in the trillions. The test site was there were 928 tests conducted at the Nevada test site over a 50-year period, and it cost a lot of money.
There's been a lot of taxpayer money pumped into various sites all around the United States, not just the Nevada test site and Los Alamos. There are the national laboratories, which have nuclear research components, nuclear weapons storage sites, nuclear weapons factories, and nuclear power plants. Just in 2010, new federal loan guarantees for building nuclear power plants increased by billions of dollars.
New nuclear power plants are only built with huge government subsidies of the insurance, of tax rebates, of direct subsidies.
There are probably going to be more nuclear power plants built. And a nuclear power plant uses enriched uranium. And if you can enrich uranium for a power plant, you can enrich it for a weapon.
And that's the whole issue in Iran, for example, is that the Iranians claim bomb? What bomb? We're just building these centrifuges to enrich uranium for a nuclear power plant. But exactly the same centrifuges, not similar technology, not the same approach, precisely those pieces of equipment could be used to then further enrich that uranium to make uranium for a nuclear bomb.
The only thing that could make it a little bit safer would be the abolition of nuclear weapons. Mind you, I'm not addressing now the whole question of whether nuclear power in itself, with its problems of Chernobyl-like explosions, the horrible and unsolved problem of where to put the waste so it can sit for 1 million years without contaminating anybody. I'm not even mentioning those issues. I'm really just talking about the connection with proliferation. And that's a deadly connection.
Besides the horrible accidents involving nuclear power plants, there have also been 32 weapons-related accidents, including a time in Wyoming when a computer malfunction caused a missile to go into launch mode. The people working there parked an armored car on top of the missile silo to stop it. Then, in 2005, at the Pantex plant in Amarillo, Texas, there was a time some exhausted workers put too much pressure on a missile they were dismantling and almost blew up a hydrogen bomb that was 100 times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima. There was even a broken arrow in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1957 when a bomber accidentally dropped its load just outside the city limits. What if one of these big bombs went off? What would that even look like?
This area here is talking about the fire. And the fire was a very significant part of what happened. And this whole area right here was totally burned. It was crushed and burned. Almost anything combustible in this area burned. And I just want to point out that this area here is 2 kilometers. And this was created by a fireball that was 280 meters. If a 20 megaton bomb had been dropped, the fireball itself would have been this big as this whole thing. That's just the fireball. And then the firestorm would have been, 20 or 30 miles out would have been the firestorm. And it would not take all that many of those kind of firestorms to change our climate. That's what we've been hearing lately.
It is a kind of vision which is apocalyptic that many people have become numb to. So I think it's very important to remember to go back again and again to what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Nagasaki, target for the second atomic bomb. Just 3 days after Hiroshima, this explosion was concentrated in an area of 1 square mile, destroying its selected terrain even more completely.
1945年8月9日、朝早く空襲警報のサイレンが鳴りましたので、10歳の私は8歳の妹の手を引き、姉の子供、男の子をおんぶして爆心地から800メートルほど離れている横穴へ隠れに行きました。1945年8月9日午前11時2分、ピカーッと光ったのは覚えていますけど、ものすごい爆風で吹き飛ばされて、誰かが頭を叩きますのに気がついてびっくりいたしました。誰もいないはずの大きな横穴の中には、目が鼻と鼻のところがぶら下がっている人、真っ黒くげの人、おーいおーいと悲痛な声が聞こえますので、見るとお腹が破れて腹渡が飛び出ている人たち、2倍3倍水ぶくろ膨れ上がっている人、首がない赤ちゃんをおんぶして助けてくださいと叫んでいる人たちがいっぱい入っていました。しかし防空の中は死体がいっぱいで、匂いで私たち子供もゲーゲー3人であげて、その匂いでまた具合が悪くなって、翌朝やっと外からの声で助けてもらいました。外に出してもらった時びっくりしたんです。今まであったうちが一軒もありません。あるのは黒焦げの死体がルイルイと転がっています。私たちが裸足で足が熱くてたまらなかったんですけど、母ちゃん母ちゃんと言いながら黒焦げの死体を一つずつ白木小学校の下にかかっている橋を目当てに歩きました。その橋の上から顔を覗くと、浦上側にはたくさんの人々、焼けただれた体で水を求め、水を飲んでは息絶えて川底に沈む死体があったり、岩に引っかかる死体、海の方へと流れていく死体がいっぱいありました。この辺がうちなんだけどねと思うんですけど、焼け野原で何にもない。一生懸命歯を探します。母ちゃん母ちゃん、お腹の底から母を呼びました。声なき声、たとえ呼ぼうと叫ぼうと、私たちの声のみが焼け野原に響いて、相手の声は私たちには届きませんでした。母も近所のおばさんと並んで黒焦げになって死んでました。そうやって一生懸命頑張って生きてきたんですけど、私たちが人間らしく生きることも人間らしく死ぬこともできる。それはなぜかというと、得体の知れない病に苦しんだからです。発が抜け、鼻血が出、歯茎から血が出て、血便が始まって、みんなから嫌がられました。そういう生活が続いていく中で、妹のお腹がかきむしたところに肺がたまり、そしてウジ虫が湧き始めました。取っても次から次に湧く。夜になるとクチュクチュクチュと音がする。ねっちゃん、うちの肉は釘を虫歯取ってくれんねえって泣くんですか。明かりがありません。電気がなくって暗闇ですの、取ってやれませんでした。夜が明けるまで待っとかんでね。夜が明けます。はい、起きらんね、ほら虫歯取ってやっけん。立ち上がって妹の足元に、一晩中妹の肉を食ったウジ虫は丸々と太ってポタポタポタポタと落ちます。ある日妹が帰ってきません。どこ行ったんだろうって思ってみると、おーい、今度は若い女の子が列車に飛び込んだぞっていう声が聞こえてきました。走って行ってみると、線路と線路の真ん中に顔がぐちゃぐちゃに崩れ、腕が切断され、足がない。鉄道視察の特徴は、車輪が全部洋服を巻きつけて持っていきます。そういう姿で妹はウジ虫が湧いている部分のみを表に出して息絶えてました。私は妹をしっかりと抱きかかえました。市役所の人が箱を持ってきてくださいました。その箱の中にそーっと収めた時、私の胸は妹の血液で真っ赤になります。見物の人がいっぱい来てて、なんだこの死体は、腕はどこさん飛んどってや、足は中やっかという声があちこちから聞こえてきます。 私は線路伝いを行ったり来たりして、なぜ死んだの、なぜもっと頑張らなかったのと言いつつ、妹の腕を一つ二つ、足を一つ二つ、線路にべっとりとくっついている肉を棒で外して箱に収めました。62年経った今日、得体の知れない病に苦しみ、一番女性の必要とすべき子宮に使用できましたので、事実を的確に伝え、原子爆弾は私のみで終わったのではありません。私たち被爆者の次の世代、2世にも得体に知れない病に苦しみ、甲状腺、喉が腫れて手がブルブル震える、そういう病気に苦しんでいらっしゃる方々、白血病で苦しみながら死んでいった人たちがたくさん若い人でいらっしゃいます。
The reason I wanted to stop here and talk to you about this is because this is my confession time. That when I first came through here in 1984, I was really just thinking like a bomber. And my interest was in the power of the bomb. And my first impression was somewhat being disappointed that there were still so many buildings still standing. I was thinking, you know, it was a tougher bomb than that. You know, all of those things should be flat. But it wasn't for at least, I would say about 2 years. I suddenly was reading a book called Children of the A-Bomb. In reading that for the first time, I actually shed tears because I couldn't help but actually think about that, you know, think how it was to be in that situation. And then I realized how I had not been letting myself do that, and became very much aware that there's a huge difference between people like you who come through and feel what you feel, and people like me and people like a lot of the businessmen that I bring through here who come through and we are not open. We are thinking like bombers. We are not into seeing the suffering. We only see the power.
At the beginning of August, people come to Ashley Pond in Los Alamos to commemorate what happened at Hiroshima. While in Hiroshima, the people there commemorate the dead by floating lanterns on the river near Ground Zero. There's another tradition that takes place at the Hiroshima commemoration in Los Alamos, in which some of us put on sackcloth to show our repentance for the sin of nuclear weapons. This action is inspired by a Bible story from the book of Jonah, where everyone in the city of Nineveh donned sackcloth to show their repentance for their sins.
When I come here every year, I recall the abolitionists from our own American history who walked into the country publicly and said, we are announcing the abolition of slavery. A new world is coming where everyone will be equal. And the people said, you're crazy, it's in the Bible, we've always had slavery. No, they said. They held up a vision of a new world without slavery, and they gave their lives for that vision. We are like new abolitionists. We're coming to Los Alamos like our brothers and sisters in Hiroshima. We are announcing a new world without nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons have been with us since 1945, and to a lot of us, they may seem overwhelming. But there are already lobbyists, scientists, activists, elected officials, Habakasha, and many others who are working on this issue. We just need to join or support them.
Og så forlader vi vores fokus på Japan og atombomben for denne aften. Om lidt skal det handle om John F. Kennedy. Var han en fantastisk præsident, eller var det snigmordet på ham, der gjorde ham til en myte? Det undersøger vi lige straks.